Hey guys, this is Savannah from earthandwater.co. Today I'm here with Andrew Dadu, transpersonal psychotherapist. And we're going to talk about spirituality and psychedelics and all sorts of really cool stuff that I have definitely been thinking a lot about lately.
Thanks for having me, Savannah.
Yeah. So tell us how you got into doing this work.
Um, I through my own spiritual experiences, basically. I had some really far out experiences. I got really scared, really overwhelmed. I did not find effective support.
Mm.
Um, and I want to say I stumbled into this work, but then on the other hand, I also want to say that it's been something that's been seeded in me by my family system, by my ancestors. I didn't really stumble into it, really. Yeah,
You were kind of born into it.
I would say so. Yeah, that's what astrologers say. When astrologers look at my map, they're like, "Oh, well, I'm not surprised that you do the work that you do." So,
Well,
yeah.
cool. Yeah, I find that spiritual, what do we call them? Experiences
hmm
tend to run in families that I've noticed.
Yeah, there's something to that. I've noticed that as well, and I'm not at a point yet where I can say it with absolute credibility, but it's definitely something that is highlighted time and time again. Within my own family, spirituality isn't necessarily a thing. They're very religious. Um, and so, like yes, there's some of that, and also there hasn't necessarily been any research on it yet. So let's see what might come out of that.
Yeah, we're just now getting into the era where we're okay doing research on spiritual type things, which I'm super excited about because up until recently, well, I guess quantum physics, the recent developments in quantum physics is what's really bridging the gap between mysticism and what we consider science, even though I've always said that they're the same thing because the only thing that is what is, and it's humans who are trying to put them in boxes and separate the boxes and label the boxes when in reality it's just one big box, and we're the ones in the big box that, the box is too big for us to understand because we're little, so we're sectioning all of the pieces in the box off into their own boxes trying to understand. But it's really all of the same thing, and I'm really excited that we're bridging the gap between spirituality and science because up until recently, spirituality has been laughed out of academia for being, woo-woo and crazy.
Yeah, it has, and it still is to a certain extent. I think
Mhm.
psychedelic research is really pushing at the paradigm and really, really challenging a lot of that. But yeah, I'm definitely on the same page with you. Quantum physics is has bridged the gap, but also now uh, meditation as well, like mindfulness practices and the research that's been done with that also has really challenged some of the ways that we think about healing and transformation and the way that we think about consciousness and altered states and what things we can do in altered states, whether they be conscious dreaming or awake while dreaming, right? Like it's really, really an amazing time to kind of see how so much of this is opening up for us right now. And there's this talk in academia that there's the old paradigm, and the old paradigm is very like materialistic, constructivist, very like you know spirituality doesn't exist, mysticism is for crazy people kind of thing. And then there's a paradigmatic shift, which is where people like me come in and other consciousness researchers or other transpersonal psychologists that are really seeing value in spiritual and mystical experiences and psychic phenomena, that it is actually a thing and it's something that we can deconstruct, we can philosophize about it, we can get to know it as much as, looping back to your previous point, as much as we are just a little being in this huge box that we're trying to understand. And will we ever be able to understand it, right? Like that's a good question to keep in mind. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really helping a lot of people because there's this whole like schizophrenia, for example. There's this whole theory that people who are schizophrenic are, or like dementia,
Mhm.
or maybe Alzheimer's. Not really sure about all of those, but that people who have these, what we call disorders, may actually be just looking through the veil, or a like one foot in physical reality where we're all at, and then another foot in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, yeah, especially schizophrenia. I don't know so much about dementia and Alzheimer's,
Mhm.
but schizophrenia definitely, right? Like, and the way that I like to look at it is sort of being on a continuum, and we can have these different types of non-ordinary experiences where we think we're seeing things or hearing things that aren't necessarily um objectively there, right? Uh, but what, who gets to decide that somebody is schizophrenic versus somebody is a mystic?
Mhm.
And that's something that I'm really weary about. And I'm not gonna say that all individuals who have schizophrenia are actually mystics
Sure.
or spiritual individuals, but I don't think that they're one and the same either, right? So they're like, yeah, I like to look at it as as it being on a continuum. I think that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, they have looked into tribes that are still, don't really have a whole lot of contact with the modern world, and they're still living the way they did thousands and thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And they take these people who would in our society not fare well. We would label them with, schizophrenia or other things. And they train them to be shamans. And this modality, this construct of how they run their civilization has worked really well for them. And they find a place, they're able to find places for these people. Whereas our modern setup doesn't at all. A lot of them end up homeless if they don't have the loved ones and means to be cared for.
Yeah, that's what I find in my own work as well. Like, when I come across individuals who have really intense, far out spiritual experiences, and maybe if they were to go see a mainstream psychiatrist, they might get labeled with schizophrenia or psychosis or psychotic like episodes,
Hmm.
or manic episodes.
Hmm.
What I find with a lot of the people that I come across is they actually do turn to a healing profession,
Hmm.
whether that be actually becoming like therapists, like somatic therapists or psychedelic practitioners, or uh, energy healers or sound healers, they all ultimately turn to some sort of healing profession. And what are shamans if not the archetype of the healer, right? Like the wounded healer. And I think that really comes alive in these intense spiritual experiences. And it's not just shamans, right? Like even nowadays in New Zealand, there's psychologist, ooh, I forget his name. um, but anywho, there's a psychologist who did a study, and he was working with a young man who was going through a spiritual emergency. And this young man was part of the Maori tribe in New Zealand. And 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 he started having experiences with his grandfather who passed away. Um, and I like to name this study, and I'm naming it right now just because it's out in the public domain. We can talk about it, yeah. So I don't necessarily want to talk about client cases that I have because I don't have permission. Those are confidential cases, right? So anywho, so this study, this man who's working with this Maori teenager who starts seeing his dead grandfather, and his grandfather is teaching him things around. His family wants him to see a therapist because that's what has sort of been recommended by the school system, because the teen is also in the mainstream school system. And the therapist starts doing research into Jungian psychology and into spiritual emergency, which are these like sort of intense spiritual experiences. And he names it for this kid like, hey, you're going through a spiritual emergency. And he supports him. He sees it as like a super valuable healing process, encourages his healing, encourages him to keep evolving and keep moving through these experiences. And ultimately, his Maori community actually really um, also values this experiences that he's having. And he's actually in the process of being trained to be a leader in his community. Whereas the mainstream school system in New Zealand were going to pull him out of the school system because he was dangerous and couldn't keep it together and he was seeing dead people. And yet, here he is being respected and revered and honored. Oh, wow, you're having these experiences. You should be a leader.
Mhm.
Right? Like it's just such a different way to look at things. And the language for this is like, you know, the Maori culture would be sort of what's called a polyphasic culture. And polyphasic means that there's many phases of consciousness that are respected, right? So in indigenous societies like where I'm in Canada, they respect multiple like altered states of consciousness, meditation, sweat lodges, all of these different experiences put you into an altered state, right? So these are polyphasic cultures, whereas we in the mainstream Western society, Canada, America, parts of Europe, we are primarily what's called a monophasic culture. We only appreciate and understand the waking state. Anything else, we think, oh, that's imaginary, that's dreamy, it's non-existent. Don't pay attention to it. It's not important. It's not good for your health. It's not good for creativity, etc. But really, like actually there's a lot of benefits in polyphasic cultures, right? Like they can be extremely altered states can be extremely healing. They can be creative. They are extremely beneficial for our brain and our body, etc. That was a lot there to share. So maybe I'll pause there and see how that lands for you.
Oh no, yeah, I think that's wonderful because yes, that is more in alignment with the human nature and the human experience. And it gives a place for these people who don't always have a place or can't find their place because the
Monophasic.
monophasic, okay, monophasic mentality would probably encompass the majority, I would say, because how else would it become just the singular direction that we looked? But which leaves the other phases the minority. And that can be really hard, especially when from your own personal research into, like, say someone's having a spiritual emergency in and of themselves, and that can go to one of two ways. I suppose it can go just complete crazy way. Like I don't know what's happening to me. Nobody understands. Emotional outbursts, non-relating to no support, lots of problematic things there. But when you have the support and when you have somebody tell you that you're not crazy, because I said one of two ways and then only covered one. The other way would be, say that you have the mind enough, and I'd say that a vast majority of us don't have the mind enough to stabilize what we're experiencing long enough to look for answers that don't fall under the crazy umbrella, and it can be really isolating.
And you hit on something really key right there, like the ability to stabilize, right? Because if individuals come into these states and their culture is if they're coming from a monophasic culture and their culture doesn't appreciate these states or their experiences, they are completely destabilized, right? Because it's so different from previous lived experiences. And there does need to be a period of time where they can restabilize. And you will hit on something else that's really important, which is support. Our societies and our cultures don't have, no longer, perhaps at some point we did have systems. Currently, we don't have large systems that can support these individuals through these conscious transformations. We are pathologizing them and telling them that they're crazy and to take medication and you're going to be stuck with this for life.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think that's helpful. Yeah. And and it's not like not it that's not just my own personal opinion from other research that's been done on these states within transpersonal psychology. it's not helpful to tell somebody who's having a spiritual experience that they're schizophrenic and that they should take some medication.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
I understand it from the point of view of someone experiencing these spiritual emergencies. I It runs in families, right?
Mm,
So my mother, my uncle, my grandmother have so my family is also not spiritual at all. They are also very religious, but the funny thing is that a lot of people are spiritual without realizing they're spiritual. When I was growing up, everything was really hush hush. Like you didn't talk about ghosts, you didn't talk about psychics, you didn't talk about, I don't know, insert whatever witchy thing right there. It was just all hush hushed. But at the same time, they would, behind closed doors, talk about how they saw things or they experienced things. So even though it was very hushed and you don't talk about that and, oh, that didn't happen, it was also at the same time. And I'm sure a lot of people find the, disparities in people saying one thing and then acting another. And it's just like, it's really confusing, especially as children. But so I had this upbringing to where on one hand, yeah, these things exist, but on the other hand, no, we don't talk about it. We don't explore it. We don't discuss it. But my grandmother would very openly tell people that she saw things and had prophetic dreams. And
mm,
so that helped me a lot when myself realized that I was too. So I wasn't alone. And having support means everything in the world. But I went through this huge, like, for 10 or so years, probably. I don't know. I was okay with it more or less when I was a kid. And then somewhere around early teenage years, started trying to shut it out. So like I'd see something, be like, no, I didn't. And then so I was just absolutely not, absolutely not. And then it pretty much went away, more or less. And
mm,
then about 2 years after I had my daughter, and she's fixing to turn 6, so that's how long with the time frame or whatever. I started experiencing things all over again, and they were really intense at this point, and I thought that I was losing my mind. I thought I was
mm,
insane. The most notable thing I experienced was I began to be able to see energy, which
mm,
it took me years to figure out that that's what was happening. I just thought I was losing it. And of course, you don't really know where to turn or what to do. You don't want people to think you're crazy. You don't want yourself to think you're crazy, even though you absolutely do. And so a lot of us turn to people like therapists and counselors because who else do you talk to? And yeah, it was a long road. They ended up, I was on antidepressants for a while, which
mm,
didn't really do anything. And it's just from my own experiences moving forward with the research that I've always been into spirituality and stuff anyway, and then meditations. And I got deeper into that I was able to figure out for myself what was going on. But
mm.
most people for sure don't have that kind of support. I didn't, I guess I supported myself, but
I'm curious, did you go to your family and ask them like, hey, I know you're all experiencing this too. Like, how are you coping? What meaning do you make out of it? Did you have those conversations with
I did not. They were not
them?
open to things like that until
Okay.
like maybe this past year they've started being more open to things like that, but we're definitely still not in a place to where I can just ask about it because they would just wave it off and roll their eyes and tell me I was being dramatic. It's fine.
Hmm. And then with your grandmother, did you have conversations with her?
No, no, I haven't
No.
talked to her about it either. But I have a
Hmm.
friend. I have a friend who lives nearby, and I always go to her for things like this. And so she helped me kind of sort things out a little bit and understand because really, most of the time, you just need a little validation. And when
Yeah.
get that validation that you're not crazy and that you can calm down and just accept it, and that it's not going to hurt you. There's things that you can do and put into place to make it not as scary, then the stabilization is a lot easier once you have that.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's the things that we can do that can be supportive are really simple, right? Like it's not, we don't have to do some crazy ritual to like protect ourselves and like it's really simple, right? It's just it's things like grounding. It's things like being in nature amongst trees and water. Those are really, really supportive. It's things like working with boundaries, like just the same way that we might practice working with our boundaries, with our family, like we can set boundaries with the other energetic field and whatever we want to call that, right? Like they're very, very simple things. Um, so I'm happy to know that you were validated in that experience because that's a huge part of it as well, right? To just say, you're okay. Like what you're experiencing is a totally normal human thing to be experiencing. Like there's nothing wrong with you. You're totally fine. And that can just, oh, like that can just bring such ease to somebody. Just a simple thing of like, you're fine.
Hmm.
I've gone
It's
through
still
it
a
too.
process for sure.
Right, for sure. And it will continue to be a process. I'm gonna say life. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong experience to learn how to have these experiences and then also um, be, a stable, grounded individual in consensus reality, to be able to hold both of them with confidence and stability. And so like it's stability, right? It's balance. It can let me be with both. It's not negating either one of them,
Mhm.
right? Because if we completely negate consensus reality, then I might say that we might go completely off the deep end, right? And
Mhm.
then that's where we're not thinking about food and eating and homes and things like that. So we still have to hold consensus reality and also not negate the experiences that we're having, that they are beautiful, that they are healing, that they are transformative, that there's really gold in them, right?
Absolutely. There's a reason that people have been talking about mysticism for thousands of years, you know?
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. I'm really grateful for you sharing that here. I know this is your podcast and all of that, and yet still I'm grateful to know that you've experienced that, and I'm grateful to hear of how you're moving through it. So thank you.
Yeah, it's important, I believe, for us to share our experiences because w a big part of why it's so hard to cope with these types of things is because those that it does happen to, or those that experience these types of things, don't often talk about it because they don't want to be seen as crazy.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have the background of everybody has always considered me crazy. So I just kind of naturally fell into that. By the time I realized, oh, maybe I am, I was already used to being. So it's
Hmm.
I really
Hmm.
do like the science practical type of stuff. I'm actually a huge skeptic. People don't peg me for that usually. They're like, oh, I'm not gullible at all. I take everything with a grain of salt until I do my own research and look further into it. But eventually, there's so many accounts across the board that are so similar that couldn't possibly have had any connection with one another. And here they are, you have hundreds, I'd I'd say even thousands of people coming out with these experiences that they've had, and they're so overlapping that you really can't deny it. I mean, you can if you want to, but honestly, why? Why? People who are so skeptical that they refuse to even open their mind to things like this, my whole philosophy has always been sure, why not? Like, human experience is so hard. It's so dramatic just in these emotions that we have and these experiences that we have. It's so overwhelmingly hard for every single one of us to just survive on a day-to-day basis, especially into, well, I guess always through the timelines. It doesn't matter what era you've been born into. Everybody's got their own different type of hard. But my whole thing with spirituality and religion and everything is, does it give you peace of mind? Does it bring you comfort? It does not matter what you believe in. It's not gonna, your beliefs aren't gonna change anything other than how you feel about life and whether it makes things a little bit easier or a little bit harder. And if you want to say, oh, Savannah's delusional, I'm happy and delusional.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I can add something to that, it's not necessarily, do our beliefs bring us joy and happiness, but it's also realizing that we are conscious creators of our beliefs, right? Like based on our lived experiences, we create stories, right? And when people have these really far out experiences, they can, yourself or myself or somebody listening, they can believe consensus psychiatry or consensus, sorry, mainstream psychiatry, and they can take that story and make it their own. This is what my experience means. Or they can lean on spiritual traditions and they can then be also a conscious creator of the story that they're, oh, this is the path of the wounded healer. Oh, people who experience this become therapists or become space holders or become energy healers. Many people have done this before me. What do I want to believe? Right? Here are two choices. I can choose between them. I don't have to be fed that this is what this means, and I don't have to take on a label just because somebody with a piece of paper that says that they're a doctor tells me that, right? And that's I think that's where I find my own work really moving in because I want to empower individuals to create their own story, to create their own meaning out of their experiences, to support them to remember that they're conscious and that they're empowered and that they have everything within them. They don't have to, submit to pathology, the model of pathology, right? They can choose, right? And we can choose. We can all make these choices.
And there's a lot more empowerment in the, what's the opposite of pathologizing? That word.
Um, it would like health and healing potentially. So it would be either regressive experiences. So regressive experiences would be pathology
Hmm.
versus progressive experiences
There
are
you go.
experiences that are, in service of our greatest healing and self-authentic expression. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there's more empowerment in that. It's you feel more confident, more self-actualizing rather than pathologizing this. But oftentimes has the word disorder tied to it. And if you tie yourself to one of those disorders, um, it makes things, it saps the energy from you. It makes you feel more like a victim and out of control rather than in control because you're on the other side of things, you're choosing the story. You can choose the story that there's something wrong with you, that there's something disorderly or broken or genetically wrong or whatever, whatever, whatever. And that's why you struggle in life. Or you can say, well, I'm special or whatever story you like. It's the same thing with ADHD and autism. I have spent my entire life knowing, we've all spent my entire life knowing that I was neurodivergent in some direction. We just didn't know which direction. And it wasn't clear to us that that's what was going on until I was already grown because it just wasn't something that you commonly diagnosed, especially girls with when
Mm.
I was growing up. So once I became an adult and actually noticed the symptoms in my own children is how I figured out what was going on with me. But I And I went back and forth about being officially diagnosed for a while. And the I decided not to. I decided
Hmm.
not to get officially diagnosed. And I've had a lot of people be like, but don't you want to know what you're actually dealing with so that you know how to counter it and you know how to throw things at it so that you can better live in the world and whatnot? And I was like, my children, I absolutely am. I believe in getting children officially diagnosed because that helps the school system work with the only difference it would do for me as an adult is people would treat me nicer and be more patient with me. But I firmly believe that people should treat everybody nicer and be more patient with everybody anyway. So that's kind of like what I stand on. But yeah, you can choose. I feel like we need to just rename all of these things because disorder is not really fair, I don't think, because it's a rewiring. There's nothing disorderly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the disorders they come in from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual from it's a US like huge chunk of thing where a bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists sit together and they say, oh, this is a disease and this is a disorder and blah blah blah, and here are the telltale signs. And most of that, unfortunately, my understanding is that it's for the benefit of insurance companies,
That
right?
tracks.
So that, yeah, so that we can say, oh, this person has PTSD and they need 46 sessions of one-to-one therapy. Insurance company, please make sure that you cover their therapy. Yeah. But I've been trained and I come from the perspective of just looking at the whole person, right? It's not the diagnosis, it's not anything of that. It's who are you? Like how do you sleep? How do you eat? How do you move through your day? Who are your ancestors? Were you born on this land? Do you have ancestors from everywhere around the world? Do you know what your roots are? What are your spiritual beliefs? What are your dreams? Do you remember your dreams, right? Like all of this stuff, can we pull you as a whole person instead of just saying, oh, you've got ADHD or oh, you've got complex trauma. Sure, maybe. And appreciate you as an individual, as a human, right? Who really just wants to be seen, felt, and heard, and to have somebody to just compassionately witness. Yeah, to just we really all just want to be loved and to love in return. So can we just just let go of these diagnoses if they're not necessarily helpful or supportive, right? And I hear that you're doing that for your children because it's going to benefit them in the school system, right? And I think there's pros and cons to that, right? Because that's definitely the pro, but then the con is, are they going to how is their relationship going to be with this label as they develop and as they grow, right? So it's it's so complex, and I think that now with more research around our body and around our nervous system and our brain and how we sleep and altered states of consciousness and what happens and what is consciousness, like we don't know what that is, right? Like what is reality? We don't know. We're just theorizing. So can we stop trying to put labels on people and just really expand and step back to just take all of them into consideration? Yeah, that if people are seeing things or feeling things or they have energy inside of their body, that doesn't mean that they're psychotic, right? That's just something that they're experiencing. They're still a human being. Come sit with me. Let's have a conversation. This is hard for you. Like, I hear you. You don't need to be alone with that. Yeah. Let me give you some tools that might help you, or let's explore together and see what might help you instead of just here's a label, bye.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, that hurts my heart. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I wish I had the numbers in front of me. There's the spectrum of light that exists, or something like that, is vastly larger than the little sliver of what we're across the board able to experience and see. So we know that there are tons. There's more going on around us that we can't see and we can't experience just with our physical senses than there is that we can. And that's a cool direction to look at when you're looking into these things and experiences and psychedelics, and how the theory is that, I mean, it's not the universal theory by any means, but one of the theories about psychedelics is that they allow us to experience and perceive some of these other things that are going on around us.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you. Like we can only experience just a small sliver of things, right? And there's so many modalities, right? Like yes, psychedelics is one of them. Meditation is another one.
Hmm.
Sound and music can be extremely sensitive to some individuals.
Hmm.
Blackout rooms, right? Where all your senses are cut off for an extended period of time, right? 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on your
Sensory
capacity.
deprivation
Sense,
states.
yeah, sensory deprivation. All of these are just different modalities for us to, I don't know, to have a different felt experience, right? Whether it is that we're opening up to something, whether we're more like a TV with antennas that is able to pick up signals from somewhere else, whether we're tapping into the electromagnetic field and the quantum field and funky things happening at a distance, like we don't know, right? All we can do at this point is just try to create meaning that is supportive for our growth and for our self-actualization. Yeah, but you're right. Like even visually, we can only see of the whole visual spectrum. There's so much out there that we cannot like not even understand, but we can't even experience. Yeah.
Hmm. I can't begin to grasp it, but I'm glad we're starting to do research on it. The government themselves have recently, over the past, I don't know, some odd years, not recent years at this point. I think the studies have been out, the files have been out there for everyone to look at for a while now. But the US government, well, I think it's been several governments actually, not just the US, who have done experiments on not only psychedelics and the experiences those give you, but also psychic abilities. So there's got
Yeah.
to be enough to science there for the governments to get interested.
Yeah. And there's, for anybody who's a psychic or who's what's the word? Is skeptical about this. Yeah. There's also this other theory that whoever's doing the research on the psychic phenomena has an actual impact on the research. Yeah. So it's the observer effect in quantum physics that if I don't believe in the research that I'm doing,
Hmm.
then it's much more likely for whatever I'm studying to not show psychic phenomena if I don't believe in it as the researcher.
Hmm.
Versus if I, as the researcher, am much more open-minded and curious and maybe have had my own experiences, that can also have an impact on the research. Yeah. So there's it just gets really complex and entangled. But there's this beautiful man, Rupert Sheldrake. He's done amazing research on connection between humans and also humans and non-humans at a distance. There's also the Institute of Noetic Sciences in California that does amazing work, and they do a lot of funding and research. There's also um, CIAS, which is the California Institute of Integrative Sciences, and their transpersonal psychology program, but also their journal, which is full of psychic phenomena and near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. And there's such an upwelling of information now that is really um, kind of emerging, right? Like I think for a long time in the 60s and the 70s, the governments were doing like remote viewing experiments.
Hmm.
And now that information is out in the public, but for a long time it was very segregated, right? Because they were doing it for, I don't know, for war-based
Right.
reasons, right?
Always a matter of national security.
Yeah, yeah. And and that also brings me sadness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because he this is something that all of us as humans can potentially have access,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like mystical experiences are not something far off. You don't have to go sit in a cave in the Himalayas for 20 years to start having these experiences. Some of them are born into it, like you, it sounds like you and your family. Some of them, like me, can arrive at them quite easily through yogic practice, yeah, or through meditation. Psychedelics is another modality, but they're very, I really want to argue that if people want to have mystical experiences, that they can. Yeah, they're
Absolutely.
accessible, really quite easily accessible.
I agree completely. It doesn't take a whole lot more than just opening up your mind to the possibility of experiencing things. Because a lot
Yeah.
of us, I think, will find that we do already. We just have labeled it as something else or written it off as not a big, like, I don't know, lots of things.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Hmm.
And going back to that observer effect, it really does prove itself or disprove itself based on whoever's doing the experiments, which really puts us between a rock and a hard place in making progress and such things.
It does. It really does. And yet at the same time, if there are people, like myself or like Rupert Sheldrake, not to put myself in the same basket as Rupert Sheldrake because he's amazing, but like if there are people who've had these experiences at firsthand and then stepping into doing research, and I think that that can really shift the paradigm. Yeah. And especially now with modalities like breath work and cold plunges, like they're just everywhere. I mean, I live just outside of Vancouver in Canada.
Yeah.
And every weekend there's like a sauna thing and a breath work thing and an ecstatic dance and any any modality that you want to take you into an altered state to have a mystical experiences is just at people's fingertips. And although I think we've really talked about like the healing benefit and how beautiful and healing these experiences can be, there's also the shadow aspect of them, right? Because they can be
Hmm.
quite addictive. They can also take individuals to really dark, scary, overwhelming places if they don't
Right.
have the support, if they don't have the grounding, if they don't have enough context, yeah, to understand what's happening.
Hmm.
Then their system can get overwhelmed quite quickly, right? It can be too much, too fast, too different from previous lived experience. So they're like, I just wanted to name that, yeah, that yes, they're healing, and yes, they're beautiful, and yes, go seek them out, and yes, they're accessible, and do so in a mature and wise way.
Right. You got to use discernment. You got to know yourself. You got to know if you're capable of handling things or if you're not capable of handling things because they absolutely can be either or. They can be super, super healing and you walk away from it completely changed forever. And and they can be profound in the sense of maybe you've struggled with anxiety and depression your entire life and it's just been crippling and it hinders your regular day-to-day life. One of these experiences has the potential, I'm not saying it will for sure, but it has the potential to completely eradicate every bit of that from your life and you walk away never experiencing a bout of depression or anxiety ever again. It's kind of a toss up if you get one of those or not. Also, there are things that you can do to prepare yourself to make sure that you have, not make sure. You can never 100% make sure, but you can tip the scale in your favor to do everything that you possibly can to have a good experience. And that comes
Yeah.
from support and environment and the mindset going into it. I watched this there's a really cool documentary on, I believe it's Netflix, that came out recently. We watched about psychedelics and it was like all of them. And LSD and mushrooms, and I don't know if there's more or not. I'm really not very versed in stuff like that, But they said that if you go into things like that, just wanting to get high or trip or, whatever, then you're probably going to have a bad experience and you deserve it. But if you go into it like, okay, I've heard that this can fix some of the problems that I'm really struggling with, and I really, really, that's what I want to do, that's what I hope to do, then you are more likely to have those types of experiences. But
Hmm.
I'm super happy to hear that altered states are easily accessible where you live. They definitely are not where I am.
No.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm in Alabama,
Okay.
so not only am I in the US, but I'm in a very, very what's the word? What's a nice word? It's fine here.
Okay. Yeah. And I wonder if it's gonna change as well with time, right?
It
With
will.
everything that's so easily accessible with the internet and the way that we can connect, right? Like even you and I, right? You're in Alabama, I'm in Vancouver, and we're having this conversation.
Mhm.
Um, I don't I think it's rapidly changing. Maybe that's my idealistic, hopeful self speaking.
I think
But
so too.
I think there's still some credibility to it at the same time. Yeah.
And rapid change means something different than people think it means. Um, because change is inevitable. Life is just one change after the other. The only constant is change. But
Right.
we think things should happen faster than what they do. But just you know, 10 years ago, I don't even think it was that long. I think it was less than 10 years ago. My town was completely dry. You couldn't even buy alcohol. So now we have states, like whole states that are legalizing or decriminalizing a lot of things. And my state will definitely be one of the last to do so. But I do think that we are moving towards a more open mind with these things. The internet brought us all sorts of available information, and we're seeing it's breaking down these belief systems that have been so well established for so long. And we're finding that a lot of these belief systems around these types of things aren't factually based. They're not like experiments, scientific data behind backing them. It's just things that were possibly maybe pushed on us in the agenda in previous decades for whoever, whatever purposes they may have had for that. And now we're having to open our minds to the research, like the actual research that is coming out, that these things can be really beneficial. And from there, we just got to get out of our own ways.
Yeah, and there is a what I wanted to add there as I was listening to you is there is a thing in academia and I think in mainstream society as well where it just cognitively individuals can't look at certain information
Hmm.
because it's so different from their own belief structure that they've created for themselves, so they completely negate that.
Hmm.
And at the same time, those people are gonna grow old and leave their roles and their systems, and new people who are, younger people who are more open-minded have had different experiences. They've been more what's the word? Oh dear. Like like when bees go from flower to flower, they're pollinizing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, just had to find that word there for myself. English is my second language, and sometimes I just like formulate things in a funky way. But anyways, like they've been much like pollinized by different cultures and by different experiences, right? Like my grandmother, like she knows what yoga is, but she also thinks that it's something that naked people do. She's like, she doesn't actually, she knows the word, but she doesn't actually know what yoga is, right? Whereas here I am having yoga deeply embedded in my personal practice, like studied in India yoga, I studied India and Nepal and many other places in Southeast Asia, right? So I've been pollinized and my mind is much more open and expansive to different modalities and different belief systems, different people and different cultures and all of that. So, even yeah, I just wanted to name that sort of that cognitive
Yep.
ability of some individuals that they can just sort of cut off and say, well, even if there's all this research, well, no, I'm just so skeptical to it. It can't be real. It must be fake. It might, and because that's still very much a thing that's happening in academia. And I think that's still very much a thing that's happening in psychology and my profession as well, when it comes to looking at mystical experiences, right? Like there's transpersonal psychology, which really values them. And then there's things like, you know, more mainstream psychology that only thinks that, well, if I change my mindset, then I can change my whole entire life. More like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just, it doesn't, I don't think that I don't want to totally negate it because I do think it has value and potential, but there's just this contradiction and this way that we can hopefully, I don't know, not have things so in such a conflict with one another.
Mhm.
I'm hope that over time that things from transpersonal psychology will be able to pollinize Western psychology so that they are more open to these ways of thinking. And
Absolutely. I think a lot of people would be really surprised to hear that throughout history, so many scientists and not only scientists, but anybody who's been studying and researching and experimenting with anything, how many of those came up with results that did go against what they believed in, like their religion per se is the big one that really, really did us in there with a lot of research. So they would change the results of the experiment to match what they believed in, or just throw out the experiment entirely. And it's really hard, I think, for a lot of us to understand how somebody could do that. How how can you have such a closed mind that you're so set in your ways that when you're presented with clear-cut, undeniable information about something different that you just made the discovery of the century that's going to rework how we experience and do life and see things and believe things and absolutely, and you're just going to throw it out because it didn't mesh with what you believed in. That's insane, but that has happened over and over again throughout history.
yeah, and because and I think that's a human thing and it's a natural thing for us to do, right? Because if it's too different from the way that we're currently living our life, we have two choices, right? We either go into believing in what we're experiencing and what we've discovered, and we enter a huge existential crisis. Oh my goodness, my whole life has been a lie. What do I do now? And that's challenging. It's much easier and it's much safer for the system of the self, the egoic self, to just say, no, 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 no. That can't, that's not right, right? I have to negate that. And that comes from, I think, that resistance, just wanting to protect, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
to protect ourselves. Because change, yes, it's always happening, and change can be very destabilizing and can be scary. So it makes sense, right? It makes sense to negate these experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But maybe we can move forward doing that less. Maybe we've made the world a little less scary
I
and
hope so.
little more supportive, just by talking about our experiences and having these podcast episodes where we explore all of these thoughts and stuff. Because it really does all come back to support and togetherness and compassion and love. We we want to, as humans, make everything so much more complex than it has to be because we things are complex, but they don't have to be if we don't care for them to be. They can be simple. We want to expand on all of these things because it's fun, because it's thoughtful, because it gives us our minds something to do. But and there are still a lot. there's still a lot of things in this world that we need to work on to do better for ourselves and each other. But at the end of the day, all of us just want to be safe and loved and heard. And if we can just dial back the complexities a little bit and make things a little bit simpler, I think that we would all move forward a little bit easier, a little bit safer, and be able to collectively support one another through these life-changing discoveries for the greater good, right? Maybe.
That's I'm adding my hope to that as well. Yeah. Yeah. For the greater good, and simplicity is always better, right? Thank you, Savannah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this hour with you. Tell people where they can find you and what you have to offer.
Um, yeah, so I primarily work with people one-on-one and in groups. They can check out my website, and I have some things on there that people can have a look. You can also send me a message if individuals are having these experiences, and they do, if they would like to seek support. Yeah. And no matter way that looks for them, they can definitely shoot me an email, or a message on over Facebook or Instagram, whatever suits them best, just so that they don't have to be alone with what they're going through. Yeah, I felt extremely alone in my own process, and I as much support as I can offer to others, that would make me feel better.
Well,
Thanks,
thank
Savannah.
you so much, and I'll link that close by. Oh crap, did I cut her off? I did not mean to cut her off. That's exactly what it sounded like in the edit, and she was lovely. She was lovely. This whole conversation was a wonderful experience, and I'm thinking about having her on again because, yes. Sometimes it feels like it takes us a minute to really get going, even if it seems to you guys that we're not having trouble. Sometimes, because you don't know. You don't know if you're going to click with somebody until you get on here. And some of them, these conversations are the ones that I live for. And the good ones sometimes take about an hour to even start to get to the good stuff. And I just need to bite the bullet and start having 3 hour long episodes like Joe Rogan, right? But anyway, go follow her. Let us know what you thought about the episode. Let us know what you think about all the things, because this was a juicy one. Rate, review, yada yada, Patreon, whatever. Love you. See you next week.